27 January 1974 was a Sunday. In the early hours, just before 1:30 a.m., a call came through the San Francisco Police Department Emergency Dispatch.
Yes, I believe there might be a dead person on the beach at right across from Ulloa Street. If you follow the street right down to the water, I'll drop on there. That's absolutely lying there. But I didn't want to get too close because you know what could happen.
Believing that it could be a drunk civilian passed out, or at worst an accidental drowning, officers rushed down to Ocean Beach to assist. Nothing could have prepared them for what they found at the scene. On the water's edge, half in and half out of the water, a man's lifeless body. The officers pulled the man back onto dry sand and took a closer look. He seemed to be approximately 50 years old, balding and heavy-set. But what stood out the most, the man had sustained multiple stab wounds, front and back, on his hands. He had tried to fight off his killer and succumbed to his injuries during the struggle. This was the first confirmed victim of an unidentified serial killer, believed to be responsible for between 6 and 16 murders and 3 assaults of men in San Francisco, California between January 1974 and September 1975. The perpetrator targeted gay men, believed he met at gay nightclubs, bars, and restaurants. He had a peculiar and ominous habit of sketching his victims prior to stabbing them to death. This is the profile of the Doodler. Hi, and welcome to the Most Foul True Crime. San Francisco in the 1970s was a global hub of culture. Besides the progressive hippie and political radicals, the city found itself in the grips of drugs, prostitution, and crime. Outcasts and the socially marginalized were attracted to San Francisco by a greater tolerance and acceptance of diverse cultures and lifestyles. It grew as one of the world's biggest centers for the LGBT community and LGBT rights. The city was the cradle of the pornography industry in the United States in the 70s and led to a dramatic growth of strip clubs, adult movie theaters, peep show booths, and sex shops downtown. Many American detective and crime television series were shot in San Francisco in the 1970s, and the city became well known as a backdrop to police films such as Dirty Harry. While Clint Eastwood was portraying Inspector Harry Callahan in the second installment of Dirty Harry Magnum Force, the San Francisco Police Department was overwhelmed with the Zebra murders, a string of racially motivated murders and related attacks committed by a group of 4 black serial killers. Little did they know, another criminal element lay dormant in the wings. This is the timeline and victimology. On 27 January 1974, a corpse of a man was found at the water's edge on San Francisco's Ocean Beach. He was 49-year-old Gerald Earl Kavanaugh. He had sustained multiple stab wounds. He was determined to have been conscious at the time he was killed and had attempted to resist his killer because he had self-defense wounds. His body was found facing up and showed signs of slight rigor mortis. Kavanaugh was found wearing underwear, shoes, socks, pants, a shirt, and a jacket. In his pocket was $21.12, and on his wrist a Timex. Initially delegated as John Doe number 7, the police would within a few days learn of Gerald Kavanaugh's true identity. He was born in Canada on 2nd March 1923 and lived in San Francisco. He was 5'8" and weighed 220 pounds. Never married, he was a furniture finisher, probably at a mattress manufacturer. Thanks to the good work of Kevin Fagan of the San Francisco Chronicle, more information was recently uncovered about Kavanaugh's life. According to Kavanaugh's great-nephew, Greg Chin, Kavanaugh left home Canada at a young age and served for 21 months at the U.S. Army at the end of World War II. Kavanaugh would visit home once a year to see his mother until she died in 1967. Kavanaugh ended up around the Haight-Ashbury and Castro, probably in pursuit of the freedom that the areas offered. It's important to note that the U.S. military discharged thousands of gay servicemen from the Pacific Theater in San Francisco during World War II, early 1940s, because of their sexuality. Many settled in the Bay Area, San Francisco, and Sausalito. Kavanaugh was not out to his family, but Greg managed to figure it out because of the culture that San Francisco is known for. After that, he never returned. Kavanaugh grew up in a family that was fairly Catholic, so living openly gay would have been definitely problematic. For Kavanaugh, planting himself on the West Coast made sense. Kavanaugh's sister went to San Francisco to identify his body. When the remains were finally released by the authorities, Kavanaugh's body was never taken back home to Canada to rest where the rest of his family is buried. Instead, the grave of Gerald Kavanaugh is at Holy Cross Catholic Cemetery in Coma, a small incorporated town in San Mateo County, California. Kavanaugh was the first victim. The police and the public had no idea that more victims would be claimed by the killer. Approximately 5 months later, on 25 June 1974, a woman, Warner Gibson, stumbled upon a body at the Spreckles Lake in Golden Gate Park. She called out to her men to alert the authorities to her discovery. Last seen alive the previous night at the Cabaret Club on Montgomery Street in the North Beach neighborhood, Joseph, nicknamed J. Stevens, was 27 years old. The victim had been stabbed 3 times. More blood was found in the victim's nose and mouth. The police believed that Stevens had died shortly before his body was found. Officers also suspected that Stevens was alive at the time he had been at Spreckles Lake, possibly transporting himself to the area with the killer. Stevens was a Texas-born, popular drag queen who first appeared on stage 8 years earlier. While she was well known as an incredible female impersonator, Stevens had consciously started to move away from impersonations and focus on comedy. At the time, Stevens had been recently named the summer replacement at Finocchio's, a former nightclub and bar in operation from 1936 to 1999 in North Beach, San Francisco. The club started as a speakeasy called the 201 Club in 1929, but by the 1970s, the high tourist attendance and hands-off rules discouraged the gay crowd, and they largely went elsewhere. As in the Kavanaugh case, Stevens, the second victim, had been savagely stabbed on the front and back of his body. He was also beaten so badly that his family was barely able to recognize and positively identify his corpse. In July 1974, a San Francisco sergeant, Elliot Blackstone, used his column in the Sentinel called Off the Beat to discuss the murder of Stevens. He further reassured the column's audience that the percentage of the total number of homicides that have gay overtones is very, very small. On 7 July 1974, Toba Weiss was walking her dog Moondance. Suddenly, the dog ran off and she followed closely behind. She knew something was wrong. That's when, at the foot of the Lincoln Way near the beach, she saw a man lying there and he was not moving. She knew he was dead. She and Moondance hastily returned home and immediately called the police. Inspector David Toshi described the murder as one of the most vicious stabbings he has ever seen. This was because the victim's throat was slashed in 3 places and he was stabbed at least 15 times on his body, a wrongful death. When the Sentinel first ran with an article on the murder, the victim had not been identified yet. They did, however, publish a picture of the victim that was taken at the morgue. This was the third victim. His name was Klaus A. Christmann. He was a 31-year-old German national, a Michelin employee who was last seen alive at Bojangles. At his death, Christmann wore a tan leather jacket, black side zipper ankle boots with brown Cuban heels, a white Italian Sella shirt, orange bikini briefs, one blue moonstone ring, and one brown cameo ring, along with a gold wedding band. He was said to have also been found with a makeup tube in his pocket. To the authorities, this suggested that he had homosexual tendencies. Christmann had been in the city staying with his friends, Mr. and Mrs. Booker Williams, for 3 months. His body was returned to Bamberg, Germany, to his wife and 2 children for burial. It is at this time that the San Francisco Police Department believed the Kavanaugh, Stevens, and Christmann cases were connected. The Sentinel reported that police are aware of the similarities between the murder of Mr. Christmann and the stabbing of Gerald Kavanaugh last January. There also appears to be similarities between these 2 stabbings and the murder of Jay Stevens, whose body was found stabbed front and back at Stowe Lake on June 25th. All apparently involved the victim meeting someone who suggested driving to a remote area at the beach or Golden Gate Park. All 3 were viciously stabbed front and back. All 3 were stripped of identification and property. Almost a year later, after the murder of Christmann on 11 May 1975, a crowd of about 75,000 people in New York City Central Park celebrated the end of the Vietnam War. This rally, organized by Phil Oakes, included music performances by Bob Dylan, Pete Seeger, Joan Baez, and Paul Simon. The day after, on 12 May, the 4th victim was found by a hiker behind a sand dune between Vicente and Ulloa Streets. The man was 6 feet tall, a slender 68 kilograms. The victim was found wearing a blue corduroy jacket, multicolored Picasso shirt, blue jeans, brown socks, brown shoes, and blue shorts. His jacket and shirt were blood-soaked. After an examination, the coroner determined that the cause of death was stab wounds of the aorta and heart. It is believed his body had been moved approximately 6 meters as disturbances in the nearby sand indicated. The victim would later be revealed to be 32-year-old Frederick Elmer Capin. He was easily identified because, as a registered nurse, his fingerprints had been taken by the state. Capin's sister lived in Port Angeles, Washington at the time. Port Angeles Daily News released an obituary for Capin. An excerpt of the obituary reads, "He was a medical corpsman in the Navy and the recipient of a Commendation Medal for saving 4 men under fire in the Vietnam War." On 4 June 1975, the 5th victim was found by a hiker on a Lincoln Park golf course 10 yards off the trail. He was found with his neck slashed. His remains slightly inconsistent with the other homicides because he was far older than the others. His underwear had been taken by his killer and his pants were unzipped. He was tattooed on both arms. The victim would be designated John Doe 81. The pathologist reported that the victim suffered from portal cirrhosis. His liver was killing him. Furthermore, the San Francisco Chronicle added that the victim may have been dead for approximately 2 weeks because maggots and fly larvae were found on the body. This was 66-year-old Harold Gullberg. Gullberg was Swedish and a sailor by profession. According to immigration records, between June 1930 and July 1940, he stopped in numerous harbors including Boston, Puerto Vita, Cuba, Shanghai, Melbourne, San Luis Obispo, Yokohama, and Liverpool. He became a naturalized American citizen on 15 August 1955. In January 1922, the San Francisco Police Department identified what they considered the sixth and presumably final victim. He was beaten so severely with a rock and a tree branch that he never regained consciousness. He eventually succumbed to his injuries 7 weeks later. This victim was so identified because he fit the victimology of the killer. He was found in Land's End on 27 April 1975. Land's End is located just north of Ocean Beach, where 4 of the other victims' bodies were found. The victim was 52-year-old Warren Andrews, a lawyer for the U.S. Postal Service. In the shadow of the end of the Zodiac Killer, in the heat of the Golden State Killer and the Zebra murders, 1975 was a very overwhelming year for authorities all over California. Due to the raging violence in San Francisco, the deadly nature of the 1970s for gay men means the killer is sadly not the only murderer at the time. That is why, even though there were 6 confirmed murder victims of the killer, authorities have credited the suspect with up to 14 murders. More than a year after the murders began, authorities' attention divided between serial killers and murder sprees. Little progress was made on the case. This should not suggest that the police did not, however, do anything about the murders. Lieutenant Charles Ellis of the San Francisco Police Department, who was heavily involved in the Zodiac Killer case, addressed the media and public, stating that the 6 brutal murders of gay men stretching back to January 1974 have been committed by the same person. A single suspect was being sought in 5 other murders, centering on the gay leather scene in the South Market area. He went on to present the police's understanding of the cases and the killer as: the first of the murders was on 27 January 1974 when the body of a 50-year-old man was found at the foot of Ulloa Street. 2 other 1974 murders are believed to be the work of the same person. 3 1975 murders are also attributed to the suspect, who police theorize first contacts his victims in the gay bars. His last known victim was an unidentified man found slashed to death on 4 June at the Lincoln Park Golf Course. The South of the Market victims were younger men in their 20s or 30s, believed to have frequented the sadomasochistic leather bars in the area. Most of the Ocean Beach victims are older men in their 50s. The lieutenant released a composite drawing of a young black man believed to have been the perpetrator who murdered 6 gay men and dumped their bodies in the foulest manner. The police beseeched anyone who may have witnessed or survived an encounter with the men on the composite drawing to reach out to the police. Lieutenant Ellis relayed that gay bars and tavern owners and patrons were very helpful in providing leads. However, they were still met with certain resistance and skepticism from the gay community. The community was not sure that the police had done everything within their power to stop the killing. This resistance was somewhat justified because despite the ever-rising violent crime rate, the San Francisco Police Department managed to allocate resources to the undercover lewd conduct stings targeting the cruising culture of gay men. This was considered as an important tool for catching people who are violating the law and for deterring others from trying to have sex in parks and other public areas used by families and children. The Castro's age as a gay mecca began during the late 1960s with the Summer of Love in the neighboring Haight-Ashbury district in 1967. By 1974, the Castro was for gay men a beautiful refuge from everywhere else. For example, the bar and bathhouse scenes were becoming increasingly popular. Harvey Milk had just opened his camera shop and there was no sexually transmitted disease epidemic. San Francisco Police Department records show that Kavanaugh was previously interviewed by authorities suspected of participating in cruising in the restrooms near the foot of Ulloa Street at Ocean Beach. Cruising is the act of walking or driving about a locality in search of a sex partner of the anonymous, casual, one-time variety. Ocean Beach is the same beach where responding police would later find Kavanaugh's body. Coincidentally, the anonymous caller used the payphone outside the cruising restrooms Kavanaugh was previously questioned about. The San Francisco Chronicle once reported that sodomy was illegal in California until 1976, and the police in San Francisco spent a lot of time raiding gay bars and arresting gay people despite the city's reputation for tolerance. These officers practiced an arguably creative form of entrapment. They would drive slowly through the usual pickup spots in a pickup truck and stop near what appeared to be a cruising male. Once an advance was made by the male, the officer would then make an arrest. One such case involved officers Cornelius Lucy and William Gay, who dragged Lawrence Candler from his car after a minor traffic incident and beat him so badly he suffered brain damage. Neither Lucy nor Gay were charged in the beating because Candler declined to file a formal complaint. However, a San Francisco jury eventually awarded Candler $264,500. The attitudes of the San Francisco Police Department's hierarchy towards gay people were also to blame for the skepticism. The SFPD's Director of Personnel, George Emile, was once quoted in The Advocate stating that, "I guess you could say they are of bad moral character. If he is a covert gay person, there is no question we would not hire him." Later, the SFPD's Director of Public Relations, Captain William O'Connor, said gay people were emotionally unstable. Whether this was by design or not, as more gay men died, the police lost the confidence of the LGBT community as they failed to dedicate resources and investigate the killings in a meaningful way. To the community, the police were clearly not concerned with their welfare. They were, however, concerned with the welfare of what was considered ideal citizens, victims of the Zodiac Killer, the Golden State Killer, and the Death Angels who committed the zebra murders. Some of the LGBT community leaders at the time believed that the killer chose gay men as his victims because he believed that the police would not take the murder of gay people serious, therefore allowing him to evade justice. Besides the physical evidence that the police managed to collect at the various crime scenes across public areas in San Francisco, a witness did come forward to provide some information on the appearance and physical characteristics of the murderer. He was black, between 19 and 22 years old, between 5'10" and 6 feet tall, slim, and frequently wore a navy-type watch cap. More than that, the collected information managed to provide police officers with a rudimentary profile of the murderer. According to SF Gate, the killer's method was to frequent gay bars and nightclubs in the Upper Market and Castro areas, identify a likely or preferred victim, usually a white male, After this, the killer would do something that eventually led to his moniker. He would draw caricatures or cartoons of his chosen victim and then use the doodle as a way of charming the male. Amused, flattered, perhaps titillated by the attention, the killer would suggest that they move their encounter to a more private setting, either for conversation or sexual activity. This is where the perpetrator would then stab his victims to death. As if to taunt the police and further traumatize the victim's family, the killer would leave the doodle at the crime scene. These sketches of the victims have never been released to the public. This act led to the killer being colloquially referred to as the Doodler. The moniker may sound ridiculous when referring to a serial killer, but there is surely nothing humorous about what his victims experienced in their last moments alive. On 27 January 1974, just before 1:30 a.m., a call came through the San Francisco Police Department emergency dispatch to alert authorities about Kavanaugh's body on the beach.
Yes, I believe there might be a dead person on the beach at right across from Ulloa Street. If you follow the street right down to the water, I was walking along there and I saw somebody lying there, but I didn't want to get too close because you know what could happen. Okay?
Did you want to give me your name, sir?
No, I don't think that's necessary. I just wanted to let somebody know maybe needs help or something. But felt it was my duty to report it.
Okay, fine. We'll check it out.
Okay.
Bye.
The witness used a public phone by Ocean Beach. They never identified themselves in any way. This led to some suspicions that the mysterious caller may have been the Doodler himself in the hopes of calling attention to his own murders. As the murders continued, the killer was advantaged by two things. One, the lack of police resources to investigate, and two, frightened witnesses would not go on the record for fear of being outed. Regarding the second witness, the late Charles Lee Morris told the Chronicle about a Los Angeles man who survived an encounter with the Doodler. The man was ready to go to bed with a young black man resembling the composite sketch, but changed his mind when a knife fell out of the man's coat. The third witness was a European diplomat who was assigned to the United States. In May 1975, the diplomat was in an upper market restaurant having a midnight snack when he was approached by a man who asked him if he had any cocaine. The two then went to the diplomat's apartment where the suspect stabbed him 6 times. The diplomat vehemently denied that he and the young man had any sexual relations. The fourth witness who survived a deadly encounter was an entertainer of some kind. According to the police, the celebrity was a household name. The fifth and last survivor was a well-known San Francisco figure. After scathing certain death, he left San Francisco and refused to answer any questions, letters, or phone calls from the authorities. Inspector Frank McCoy of the San Francisco Police Department told the Sentinel that, "I'd sure like to talk with anybody who's been attacked, and I'd really like to emphasize that the information we are receiving will be kept confidential." This did little to assuage the concerns of the LGBT community. Activist and American politician Harvey Milk, in reference to the case, said, "I understand their position. I respect the pressure society has put on them. This," he said, because the 3 witnesses who refused to fully cooperate with the police likely feared damaging relationships with family members and their professional life. There was little then, and there is little information gathered when it comes to building a comprehensive criminal profile of the Doodler. However, based on the information that the police did manage to gather from witnesses, they believed that the killer had a quiet and serious personality. He was raised an educated upper middle class and possessed an above average intelligence. The killer may have had mental difficulties involving sex or sexual identification problems. He may have been an art student. He was noted to have informed one of the witnesses that he was studying commercial art. According to the Chronicle, the killer told each victim, "All you guys are alike," by which he meant gay. This, the killer may have said to 5 or up to 14 men. There is one fundamental reason for the uncertainty on the number of victims. Serial killers typically have a specific type of victim. The history collection recorded 3 specific categories of victims when it comes to the Doodler, being drag queens, sadomasochists, and middle-class men. The violence against drag queens gave the authorities the impression that the killer hated trans people, while the murders of the patrons of San Francisco's leather bars and professionals of the more upscale gay bar scenes seemed to be the work of different killers entirely. Author Michael Newton expanded that this confusion in victimology led the police to believe that they had 3 different killers enacting 3 distinct serial murders. Clouding the issue even further, the Doodler was inconsistent in his precise method. Some of the victims were horribly mutilated, while others were stabbed repeatedly, but not disfigured. This contributed to the mistaken belief that there was more than one killer. It took the police some time to figure out that all of the victims were linked by the Doodler's artwork, and they had a single killer on their hands. But this early confusion means we may never be entirely certain how many men the Doodler killed. One of the first viable suspects that the police ever questioned resembled the composite sketch. He was taken into custody by the police after he had entered a bar and offered to draw patrons. In his possession, the suspect had a sketchbook and a butcher knife. The police charged him with carrying a concealed weapon. By the time the night was over, another charge of aggravated assault was added to the sheet when he attacked homicide detectives. He was, at the time, one of many suspects being considered. In fact, there were dozens of suspects, and at least one of them looked good for the murders. A week later, after this encounter with a suspect, the Sentinel reported that thanks to an anonymous lead, the police department knew the license plate number of the suspect's car. They had even spoken to the psychiatrist who allegedly treated the Doodler. The psychiatrist had supposedly told investigators that the suspect admitted during one session that he had committed the brutal slayings. The Thought Catalog reported that in 1976, 2 men were separately attacked in an apartment complex in San Francisco. An artist composite of the suspect was created. When the sketch was closely inspected, the police believed that it resembled the Doodler sketch and may have been linked to the murders. A year later, in 1977, the San Francisco Police Department informed the media that they have interviewed a person of interest for over a year. The suspect was said to be cooperating with police but did not, however, confess to any murders attributed to the Doodler. The police were relying on the cooperation of the witnesses in order to solidify the case. The police did not proceed with criminal charges against the suspect because the 3 surviving victims did not want to out themselves by testifying against him in open court. In 2019, when the case resurfaced in the media, the police confirmed that the suspect who was interviewed in 1977 was still alive and a person of interest in the Doodler case. The person of interest has not been publicly named by the police. Why the Doodler killings started on 27 January with the brutal slaying of Gerald Kavanaugh, no one knows. More than a year later, on 4 June 1975, Harold Goldberg became what was then considered the last victim of the Doodler. In January 2022, 52-year-old Warren Andrews was confirmed as the last victim. Despite more gay men falling victim to horrible crimes in the area, no other victim was ever attributed to the Doodler. According to the Thought Catalog, it was only after the murder of Gulberg that the police started to take the case more seriously. After interviewing several suspects and even identifying a person of interest, the Doodler stopped killing. Perhaps this shift in police attitudes towards the seriousness of the murders is one of the main reasons why the Doodler stopped killing. The killer probably realized that he was close to being caught. No other suspects were ever identified by the San Francisco Police Department, but if the Doodler is still alive today, he would be in his early to mid-60s. Something that became glaringly obvious and hard to ignore while researching this harrowing case: no one really cared, and if they did, they felt disempowered by others in order to give the case the attention and resources it deserved in order to be resolved. This pertains not only to the police but also to the media. The local LGBT media publishers did their best to continuously report on the murders, with some publications coming from The Advocate and The Sentinel. The San Francisco Chronicle did not publish anything until after the murder of Harold Gulberg, the sixth victim of the Doodler. Consider with me for a minute. The serial killer frequented public areas. He would remain there long enough to identify his potential victim, flirt and endear himself with them, draw a sketch of them, and together move to a secondary location. Owing to the fact that the suspect was a black man in a predominantly white area, an artist who drew publicly, he surely would stick out like a sore thumb. The Thought Catalog reported that the media ignored the murders simply because the victims were gay. Despite San Francisco being considered a haven for the LGBT community, the city existed at a time that was rife with prejudice. These killings occurred only a few years after same-sex attraction stopped being considered a mental disorder and the Stonewall riots. A few years later, on 24 April 1980, San Francisco resident and supposed gay sex worker Ken Horn is reported to the Center for Disease Control with Kaposi sarcoma. He would later be named and identified by the CDC as the first patient of the AIDS epidemic in the United States. This ensured that the Stop Doodler killings would fade from the media space and into obscurity, while at the same time ushering in a new age of media frenzy and prejudice towards gay people, which still persists today. The 7 Doodler victims would eventually become nothing more than a crime statistic from the 1970s. On the evening of 24 April 2018, Sacramento County Sheriff's deputies arrested Joseph James DeAngelo in the side yard of his Sacramento home. He was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. This man would be revealed to being the long-sought-after Golden State Killer. Subsequent to his arrest, authorities and media became more enthusiastic regarding providing more resources and attention to cold cases, with the possibility of unmasking considered successful serial killers and bringing closure to the victims and their families. Also in 2018, retired detective Dan Cunningham of the San Francisco Police Department joined the Cold Case Division. In doing so, decided to reopen the Doodler case. Detective Cunningham informed the media that one of the major problems that they ran into after reopening the case, after 45 years, many of the key figures from the original investigation are dead. This means there are no more witnesses, which is to be typically expected. on cold cases. The San Francisco Police Department went on to reveal 5 additional aspects of the case that have the potential of solving the case. The first, using the first composite sketch of the suspect, a forensic artist created an updated composite of the suspect with age progression to show what the suspect may look like today. The pair of sketches were released by the San Francisco Police Department on 6 February 2019. If alive, the suspect is said to be in his early 60s. Secondly, the San Francisco police released a new statement that offered a $100,000 reward in hopes of closing the cold case, worried that witnesses may still be unwilling to come forward due to stigma surrounding gay people. The San Francisco Police Department ensured potential witnesses that their identity will not be shared with the media. The third piece of the case pertains to DNA. According to Reuters, inspired by the success in the Golden State Killer case, the police also submitted DNA evidence from the 1974 and 1975 killings in the hopes of triggering new data. Investigators submitted DNA evidence to the San Francisco Police Department Crime Lab over the past year and are waiting for further results. They are hoping modern forensic technology might manage to extract a usable DNA sample from the evidence gathered at 2 Doodler crime scenes 43 years ago. The DNA is in the police's crime lab, not in an open source database similar to the one that aided investigators in tracking down and arresting the Golden State Killer. Kenneth Moses was quoted saying, "We made a lot of effort to collect a lot of blood samples at the time. If there's no moisture, there will be no decomposition. It was standard procedure then to dry samples thoroughly, but so far nothing has been triggered as a result." The San Francisco Police Department informed the public that they will also consider forensic genetic genealogy, which identified a suspect in the Golden State Killer murders. Fourth, the police released the audio recording of the 911 call that took place just before 1:30 a.m. on the morning of 27 January 1974 in the hope that the public can identify the caller. The SFPD Investigations Bureau Commander Greg McEachin was quoted stating that, "If you are the individual who called in 1974, we would like to speak to you about what you saw." Fifth, the police also believe the Doodler was seeing a psychiatrist with the last name Priest practicing in the East Bay area and are seeking information about him. Lastly, police spokesperson Officer Michael Andrzejczak clarified that a connection has not been made between the Doodler and the 7 victims which were identified. Contrary to rumors this morning, there are no new developments and there is no press conference scheduled. Mr. McEachin added that the police have been in contact with the victims' families in the hope to provide them closure. We extend our deepest condolences to the victims and their families affected by the tragic and senseless violence perpetrated by the Doodler, who still remains at large today. The lives of the LGBT community in San Francisco and the victims' loved ones will forever be changed. Thank you for tuning in to the Most Foul True Crime. This has been the profile on the Doodler. Please do not forget to subscribe, leave reviews, and follow us at the Most Foul True Crime across all social media platforms.